But our law school is not alone. One of the benefits of being an AAU research institution is that we have around us colleges and community and experts like my colleague, Alyssa Ayers. She is the Dean of the GW Elliott School of International Affairs. She is herself an expert in these issues as she served in the Obama administration and helped negotiate the US-India Civil Nuclear Agreement. Dean Ayers will now introduce our keynote speaker. And again, I welcome you all and thank you for joining us for this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Dana. Our auditoriums in the Elliott School aren't shaped like courtrooms, so that was a little bit of a new experience to come up here. Thank you, Dana, and thank you, Professor Dickinson, for the invitation to join you today and the opportunity to introduce the Director General. We're thrilled to be able to join GW Law and the other law school partners today, as well as the International Atomic Energy Agency in this important conference on the law of nuclear nonproliferation and nuclear safety. It's probably always been the case that nuclear nonproliferation concerns are set against a backdrop of world challenges, but somehow it feels today as if those challenges are more urgent than ever before. We at the Elliott School of International Affairs care greatly about international security, prevention of weapons of mass destruction, climate change, and the transition to clean energy, and the International Atomic Energy Agency plays a central role in each of these areas. Today, Director General Grossi will speak about nuclear energy being part of the solution in a world full of problems. The well-established global nuclear nonproliferation regime provides the architecture for the peaceful use of nuclear technology for civilian nuclear energy and the prevention of this technology to be used for weapons by non-nuclear weapon states. In so many ways, the global nonproliferation architecture represents successful international legal and policy coordination, and that is a model that does not yet exist for emerging technologies such as in the cyber and digital realms. Dr. Grossi has decades of experience across the organizations that form the global nonproliferation architecture, so he came to his role at the IAEA with great experience in this field. I look forward to what he will share with us today about the agency and about nuclear energy, and let me now provide the highlights of his accomplished career. International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi assumed office as the agency's 6th Director General on December 3, 2019. In September 2023, the IAEA's 67th General Conference approved his reappointment to serve a second 4-year term of office. He is a diplomat with over 40 years of experience in the fields of nonproliferation and disarmament. Before assuming office as the IAEA's Director General, Dr. Grossi was President Designate of the 2020 Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty on Nonproliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, and from 2014 to 2016 served as President of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. He was the NSG's first president to serve 2 successive terms. In 2015, Dr. Grossi presided over the Diplomatic Conference of the Convention of Nuclear Safety, securing unanimous approval for the Vienna Declaration on Nuclear Safety, an important milestone in international efforts following the 2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. His prior work in the nuclear nonproliferation arena also included service as Ambassador of Argentina to Austria and Argentine representative to the IAEA, as Assistant Director General for Policy and Chief of Cabinet at the IAEA, previous senior positions in the Foreign Service of Argentina, and as Chief of Cabinet at the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or OPCW, in The Hague. He is an international gender champion, promoting gender balance in the nuclear field. And to close things off with his accomplished degrees, he holds a PhD in International Relations, International History and Politics from the University of Geneva, Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies, from which he also received his master's degree. He began his academic journey at the Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina and at the Diplomatic Academy of Argentina. Dr. Grossi, we are so thrilled that you're here today. We look forward to what you'll share with us, and I welcome you to the podium.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, good morning. Thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here, dear deans and friends. I see this more as like a conversation among colleagues. With many of you, I have worked so much on several of the key issues that we are going to be discussing today in different administrations, Republican, Democratic administrations, over this rather long career in this field. And particularly happy to be doing this here in Washington. We were just discussing when I came the fact that so much takes place here and from here reverberating for the rest of the world. And I'm, of course, the head of an institution which, as I like to say when I have meetings with my American friends, which was an American idea. Last year, I had the immense honor to bring President Eisenhower's granddaughter to Vienna to celebrate 70 years of that famous speech of Atoms for Peace, where President Eisenhower, in his own words, has said that we had to put the marvelous, as he said, imagination and intelligence of men at the service of life and not death. Quite a simple proposition, but a very essential one. Like great truths are very simple. And this is what this organization has been trying to do. But we are not going to be talking about the history, although it's important to remember the roots, but what is happening now and how dramatically important what is happening now is for international peace and security. So what I would like to do, and especially given the quality of this audience, is to give you an introduction, which would be an introduction to what I always consider the best part of these meetings, is the exchange with you. So maybe for 15 or 20 minutes, I will tell you what's on the plate, what we are trying to do, and then listen to you and answering to your questions. I think it's very pertinent that this room looks like a court, because one could say, not on me personally, but that the international non-proliferation regime is in a certain sense on trial, and that there are so many things happening, putting an amazing degree of pressure on this regime that it could actually break if we do not take certain steps to prevent that from happening. When it comes to the non-proliferation regime, what we can see is, of course, quite naturally, although, of course, we don't welcome this, but as a result of the exacerbation of conflict and geopolitical tensions, immediately as a consequence of that, there will be a nuclear dimension to that. There is, amongst the many manifestations of this conflicts, plural, there will be a nuclear dimension. And this is what we are seeing in different parts of the world, in different ways. Of course, if we look at the Middle East, which has been, of course, at the center of the international community's attention when it comes to non-proliferation or proliferation attempts or non-proliferation crisis, we are, of course, in the midst of a new and bloody chapter with what has happened after October 7th last year and the war there, and how this superimposes with the ongoing saga of the Iranian nuclear program that has been keeping us busy for so long, and a few undersecretaries, former undersecretaries here sitting with us as well. We are at a moment where, given the circumstances, you may have seen one of my interlocutors in Iran, the vice president of Iran, saying that they are considering seriously walking away from the NPT, which is not new as a statement, but now they seem to be repeating it more and more and with more clarity, even indicating that they are looking at the concrete steps that would need to be taken, the timelines, and so on and so forth. These, of course, are statements, are political statements, but they are reflective of an underlying tension which is there. What we have in Iran and what we see in Iran is a situation where the program is galloping towards a possible acquisition of nuclear weapons, which they don't have at the moment, is very important to say. with a nuclear program which was active until the early 2000s, but which has undergone quite, I would say, dramatical ups and downs with the advent of course, the JCPOA and its marginalization after the decision by the United States government in 2018 and in 2019, beginning of 2020, of the Iranians themselves to set it aside completely to the situation where we have now, where the JCPOA nominally exists, but it's an empty shell. They are not observing any of the restrictions of the plan. We have lost as the agency the visibility that we used to have on that. And Iran has grown exponentially in its capacity to enrich uranium, to produce centrifuges and other technologies that bring the latency of this nuclear program to a degree of concreteness which we had not seen before. So it is clear for all of us, and I think that whichever direction American politics may take in a couple of weeks here, there will have to be a need to look at it, and to look at it with a perspective of having some form of approach. And I'm being, as you can see, extremely high in the thesaurus and in the wording to say that be it in the form of an agreement or be it in the form of certain basic understandings, if we want to avoid a very serious proliferation crisis in the Middle East and the introduction of nuclear weapons by the Islamic Republic of Iran, there will have to be consequential decisions taken and certain basic actions also from the international community and Iran as well. We are engaged in this conversation, of course. Having this type of conversation in the current circumstance and with the elections coming here is, of course, a process that does not have the assertiveness that it could have in other circumstances. But we have to continue working because diplomacy may have stopped, but centrifuges have not. And so the production of uranium enriched at close to military levels continue, the production of centrifuges continue, and so on and so forth. So this is a very important first issue. I always like to compare, although the circumstances, political, historical, cultural, and otherwise are very different, I also like to at least remind people of the situation that we had with the DPRK, where until 2006, we were also in a process of, give and take, incentives here, an agreement there, a framework agreement, then abandoned, then we continue, then the IAEA engages, then the IAEA is kicked out, etc. And one day the line was crossed. And we have the reality that we have now in the Korean Peninsula. Of course, in the Middle East, the situation, as I was saying, is different. But what is comparable is this idea that the unthinkable may happen. And the day it happens, of course, you will have a power in the Middle East, power that has engaged directly against Israel just a few days ago, directly. That this never happened before, that you could see this kind of military exchange in a completely open way with a country that would then, at that time, be equipped with nuclear weapons. So this is something that the dramaticity of which should not escape anybody, I believe. So I would stop here on Iran, and I'm sure that we will come back to it through your questions and comments. I think closer to some of the words in that title, when we talk about nuclear safety, we have with the war in Ukraine a completely unexpected black swan that appeared all of a sudden in the international scene when, for the first time, a huge nuclear facility was seized as part of a military operation, as part of the invasion of Ukraine. Remember, in the first days of the invasion, the Russian forces did two things. They occupied Chernobyl, which they subsequently abandoned once the military evolution of things made it for them advisable to do so. And then Zaporizhia, which is still in Russian-occupied territory. A huge nuclear power plant, 6 reactors, 6 gigawatts of installed capacity in a combat zone. Not near, not in a combat zone. So confronted with that, and this is where the where nuclear law and quasi-law and practice start to change in a dramatical way, we decided to intervene. We decided to get there in the middle of things. Of course, nobody asked us to do, and I would say on the contrary, nobody wanted us to be there. But we went there, and we, in a certain sense, imposed our presence to the fact that today we have a permanent deployment of IAEA inspectors in Zaporizhia, living in Zaporizhia. I'll be there. I have been there 10 times and continue to go there. As a result of that, President Zelensky asked me to do the same with the other nuclear facilities. So now we have IAEA personnel at all nuclear facilities in Ukraine. And this week, we have also started an operation of monitoring of the critical electrical substations across the country, because of course, the operability of nuclear power plants can be affected by kinetic action, but also by blackout and the interruption of outside power, which is perhaps even more dangerous than a rocket here or there. We are deployed in this way. So in terms of process, in terms of new events that we have to analyze politically and academically as well, we have the eruption of this phenomenon of the militarization or weaponization of nuclear facilities, peaceful nuclear facilities as part of armed conflict. There are other spots, hotspots in the world where we had seen attempts to do that, which were prevented. One was a year before the situation in Ukraine between Azerbaijan and Armenia, with the Metsamor nuclear power plant as being specifically targeted in the context of one of the eruptions of military action between the two countries. So confronted with that situation, the IAEA intervened. The IAEA is working. We are at the moment the only international organization talking to both sides, as you may have seen. I have a dialogue with President Vladimir Putin, and I see frequently President Zelensky as well, which I believe it's what international organizations should do in the pursuit of the preservation of international peace and security. Talk to those who are behind the problems or the solutions that we need to be addressing. We have also set out 7 fundamental pillars for nuclear safety, which are a distillation of the hundreds of thousands of pages of safety standards and security guidance that exist, that we have put in a condensed way so international community understands what needs to happen. And with the increase of military action around the plant, I went to the Security Council and enunciated 5 fundamental concrete principles that should be observed, which could be, in plain English, boiled down to don't shoot. Don't attack a nuclear power plant. And then, of course, you can derive a number of more sophisticated derivations of that. But this is basically what we have been trying to do. So as we can see in the non-proliferation pure chapter, or in the area of nuclear safety and security, we see the instrumentalization of these things as a weapon of war or as a weapon of confrontation. And so I think from the perspective of international law, international lawyers, practitioners, and international organizations, this puts us in front of our responsibilities and what we are going to do. Before I finish and we open for questions, I want to signal the very, very important role that the agency is trying to play in view of the importance of nuclear energy in the context of another existential issue that we have internationally, having to do with energy security, climate change, global warming. People may have different views, but clearly there is an issue here in that many countries are looking intensively to nuclear as part of the solution to the energy situation that we have. With the addition, this is why I would say to the question of energy as in relation with climate change and global warming, the energy security issue, in particular in parts of the world, some parts in Asia, and quite clearly in Europe and in Central and Eastern Europe in particular, where every country, and not by chance, where every country in that part is doubling down on nuclear, because what they want is obviously to reduce their dependency on Russian gas. Even Poland, which was the only country in that sphere, former Warsaw Pact area of influence, which did not have nuclear power. Now they have perhaps the biggest, with great American involvement, the biggest plans and projects on nuclear. This week in Vienna, before coming to Washington, I opened the first international conference on small modular reactors. As you know, there's this big chapter of nuclear use that is opening for many countries in the world, and in particular for emerging industries like IT, AI, as you may have seen with Google, Microsoft, striking amazing deals with companies requiring clean energy to power data centers. Our economy would be inviable without them. We have grown completely dependent for every activity on these very essential links in the economic chain, and nuclear is playing a role there, which of course has to be done right, has to be done safely, securely, and with a clear and alert eye on the non-proliferation derivations of reactors that could be fabricated in the United States and exported to countries which perhaps may not have the institutional tissue to do things in the correct way, hence the role of the IAEA in that area. So this is the tableau, this is the big picture, the fresco, as you can see, one that has big question marks, great dangers, great challenges, and where the IAEA is trying to make a very concrete, very clear contribution to fulfill the aspiration of that speech 70 years ago. Stop here.
Thank you for that just masterful tour of the current challenges with respect to nuclear safety and nonproliferation, and just the account of what the IAEA is doing under your leadership globally. It's really extraordinary. So we have time for a number of questions. I'm going to just use the moderator's prerogative to ask the first question, which is with respect to new technologies.
Yes.
The risk of cyber attacks, the opportunities for cyber defense, AI, how is that putting pressure on the system, but also offering potentially opportunities?
Well, this has brought to the area that we globally describe as nuclear security as opposed to nuclear safety. In this, you know, your language, we Spanish speakers or Roman speakers, we say that our language is so full of nice words. Here you are richer than us because you have safety and security. We don't have that. We have only one word to describe that. So you're better. And we, even Spanish speakers and French speakers and Italian speakers, we adopt the English word because we know what safety is and what security is. And nuclear security, you remember, was something that, albeit discussed in the nuclear circles in the past and in the IAEA, only gained traction after September 11th. This is the reality where people said, well, you know, here there is a dimension that we cannot overlook. And I remember my chemical years at the OPCW as part of that. So in the nuclear dimension, that has made us increase dramatically our efforts from the traditional guns and fences sort of physical protection of nuclear material to the real thing, which is the cyber threat. And this has, I believe, this has given us enormous opportunities to work. The IAEA now has an amazing nuclear security training and demonstration center in the outskirts of Vienna, which did not exist just 3 years ago, where we are training thousands of operators from all over the world on cybersecurity and cyber operations. A lot of help from the United States, I would say, on that, and I'm very grateful for the help we are getting from the Department of Energy, the State Department, and others on this key area. So, which relates in a certain way with my last point on the expansion of nuclear. When you have nuclear power plants, small modular reactors, advanced reactors, micro reactors in remote parts of the world, etc., the need to be looking at this. I think I'm quite optimistic in this regard. The statistics we have in terms of cyber threats indicate that these exist, but we do have adequate protection against it. Of course, it requires a lot of funding, a lot of collaboration, because of course we are sure that in the United States you will not have this problem, but the issue is in other parts of the world. And this is where the IAEA is the, like in many other things, is the hub, is where we make sure that what we have here, at least to a certain extent, we will have replicated in other parts of the world.
Can we bring the mic down?
I think I can, well, I think I can speak loudly enough. And thank you so much, DP Grossi. I'm going to ask a question, but I first just want to compliment you, since we're at an educational institution, for the initiation of what I think is one of the most important educational initiatives, which is the Free Tourist Fellowship Program, which is really having an impact in bringing young women into the
Yes,
So
thank you.
I want to praise that. I want you to put back on a hat that you wore for a short period of time, which was when you were designated as the president for the review conference that ultimately held in 2022. And I'm sure as you were preparing for this, having worked NPT for a long time, you were familiar with the fact that prior to the 1995 review and extension conference meeting, there was serious consideration given to the likelihood that a vote. That's the preface to my question, which can you imagine perhaps today that it's necessary to revisit what is a tradition, not a rule, but a tradition of consensus decision-making at a minimum on procedural issues, given the challenges that we face and the fact that one or two countries are able to essentially use a unit veto to block consensus on issues, including Pillar 3 issues, nuclear energy issues, in a fashion which we saw most pronounced in 2023 in Vienna, when one country basically threatened the chair that they would not even allow him to issue his own working paper on his own authority, which is contrary to all practice. And so I know this is a controversial issue, and there's the downside to pursuing votes, but it's not prohibited by the NPT. It was considered seriously in the past, and I think the challenges we face today really require re-examination of this. I'd be quite curious what your take is on it.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Michael. And I would like to thank you as well for the I just learned that you were commemorating the 35th anniversary of Monterey, and I think education is fundamental in every sense, and your decades-long dedication to non-proliferation and the NPT in particular is something that I would like to underline here. You know, on this, I believe that you know, sometimes the sad intricacies of the multilateral game, including votes and the consensus and the rules that apply or not. Of course, it's something that we have to be looking at intensely, and I have great respect. After all, I was, you know, volunteering to the impossible task of reviewing. But what I think should not be mixed is this with the success of the NPT. And I think, personally, I take issue with the idea that if you have a review conference that does not get to a consensus, final declaration, this is an indication of the NPT is failing. And I think this is fundamentally wrong. And I think we have a responsibility to, you know, to set the clock back to the clarity that the international community needs. The issue with the review cycles, I'm not going to get into that, and we are all experts, or many of you I've read on this issue and are real authorities on this matter. But of course, as an international community, we chose, and for lawyers and international lawyers, it's very interesting, we chose to go for a system that would be reviewing a treaty. Can you imagine a similar system where we would be reviewing the UN Charter, for example? What would be the result of a review of the UN Charter, or the Statute of the International Court of Justice, or any other international agreement? We would have a lot of discussion, arguments, and which would be reflective of the conflicts of the day, perhaps, more than a fundamental questioning of the validity of the norm. And this, in my opinion, this is an individual opinion, not the opinion of the IAEA, but this is a little bit what has happened. I think the reviews are useful. In fact, just by looking at, as you know, the IAEA supports those review processes. There are lots of important areas that are reviewed, and sometimes it may be, at one time, it was the Middle East. Now, more recently, it was the conflict in Ukraine. And it could be something else next time. Who knows? So I think the important thing is to defend the NPT, for what it stands, what it's doing for all of us. Basically, that is my most, you know, my concern is that we do that. There will be a review conference with a final statement which will be agreed. That will not mean that the previous one or that the NPT was less important five years earlier. And I know that this might, you know, be a bit provoking for some. I have great respect for the processes, but I think the NPT is a great success. And this is why I'm so worried. This is why I'm so worried now when I see countries, important countries, saying, well, you know, we might reconsider and at the end of the day have nuclear weapons. And I'm not talking about Iran now. I'm talking about other countries.
Just one second.
We have people tuning in via Zoom as well, so they
Oh, sure.
like us to use the mics.
Live stream, you have the opportunity to ask questions as well. We have nothing for that. Put your
Thank-
questions.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you again. I want to pick up a little bit, Rafael, on your comment about the don't shoot norm for presumably civilian power reactors, and how you think about that challenge through the prism of this sort of new era of small, modular, sort of much more, well, transportable, perhaps, reactor systems, particularly in the sense that they perhaps could become a power source specifically for military operations. One thinks of floating nuclear power plants in the South China Sea on some of these add water and stir features of sorts, and perhaps in other applications as well. How do you think about the challenge of so-called dangerous forces doctrine under the law of armed conflict, and your idea of don't shoot, if indeed these are in fact perhaps in danger of becoming specifically military assets? How do you see that as a challenge for the international community, and specifically the international legal community, as I say this here in the midst of a law school and a courtroom? Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Of course, it's a very important question. I think when it comes to naval, which is basically one of the most, we do have small reactors or micro reactors, perhaps in remote areas, in military bases, that could be targets, potential targets. The naval propulsion perhaps being the most talked about these days. For what we see from an engineering point of view, the design of naval reactors is less of a danger in terms of radioactive release that could be a traditional nuclear reactor. What we see is not saying that it wouldn't be a problem if, for example, a vessel propelled by a nuclear reactor was attacked. But the specter, if this is what was at the back of your question, the specter of having massive releases of radioactive material because of this kind of thing is something we don't see as a real prospect. It could be, I mean, it's not. It could not be excluded, but after all, although people don't appreciate that because it's more of a military thing, we've had, of course, nuclear propelled subs, in the world for decades without major problems, including, let's remember the Kursk situation in the late 1990s, I think, or the early 2000s, where in spite of being sunk, there was never a problem of, in terms of the principle of don't shoot, on the basis, of course, of the radiological danger. I'm not saying it's not a problem. It's a problem. We need to look at it. There is, of course, a body of law, and there is, including in the Geneva Protocols of 1949, I believe, the prohibition to, already in the 1940s, I think it was an American initiative, by the way, the protection of nuclear reactors and the prohibition of attacks to nuclear reactors as well. But it's something that we will have to be following very closely, depending also on the kinds of technologies that we see today when it comes to, for example, to SMRs, to small modular reactors and advanced reactors. We have more than 80 designs that are being considered. Our impression is that perhaps we will be closer to 8 when it comes to how many are going to see the light of the day. So that would be my comment. Thank you for the question.
Okay, so we have one question in the back, but then the next one will go over here. And I know there's some people standing in the back. Please feel free to come down. There's some seats in the front.
Hi. Firstly, thank you very much for coming to talk to us today. That was very insightful. So my question is on the functions of the IAEA, especially with regards to the NPT. So the IAEA mostly has a monitoring role, so it goes in to countries like North Korea, or used to go to countries like North Korea, inspects and checks if they're in compliance with the NPT standards.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yep. So my question is, so the downfall of that is that they don't really have a compliance mechanism. The IAEA doesn't have a compliance mechanism. So they rely on the compliance mechanisms of the United Nations Security Council. And so my question is, do you think the IAEA should be reformed to have those compliance mechanisms within it? Or do you think it should be left to the UN Security Council?
Well, actually, the way you describe it, I don't know if I would be, if I would agree on this assertion that the IAEA does not have a compliance mechanism. I think the IAEA has a system of inspections and has the capacity to indicate that countries are in material breach or otherwise of their legal obligations, thereby opening the way to the board of governors coming to the conclusion that they are in non-compliance. So perhaps we do not close the circle completely, but in terms of international law and practice, I think it is pretty solid in terms of what we have. Quite clearly, in the logic of the international system, the supreme organ for the preservation of international peace and security is the Security Council, warps and all. But this is the way it is, and I don't see the international community creating as another organ that would have this capacity. But at least in the past, we have to see now, because the fracture in terms of the Security Council practice has increased quite dramatically, no? At least until a few years ago, when it came to Iran, for example, one could be pretty confident that would the Board of Governors, on the recommendation of the Director General of the IAEA, send a dossier to the Security Council, there would be action at the Security Council. I don't think we would be guaranteed of that now because of the fracture within the P5. So it's an open question whether this would happen or not. So I think the statute of the IAEA is a pretty solid one. I would not favor or propose the reform of the statute of the IAEA at this point in time.
One second.
Hi, thank you so much, Mr. Grossi. My name is Nikki. I'm an undergraduate senior. Thank you so much for coming out here today to speak to us. It's an honor. I study political analysis and security, mainly intelligence. And my question would be about security of nukes and nuclear safety. And in terms of the question specifically would be addressing to nuclear terrorism. Mainly, does IAEA have any specific measures when it comes to tackling nuclear terrorism, and specifically deterrence mechanisms? And I can give you examples like Iran and Russia, for example. If Iran obtains nuclear weapons, can it give to its proxies of Hezbollah and Houthis? For the Russian example, it would be during when Prigozhin went out to conquer Moscow and, he was stopped, deterred. What did IAEA have any, let's say, alert or mechanism that, okay, if there is a coup or a civil war right inside Moscow, Russia has nuclear weapons, will this militia obtain, let's say, nuclear codes, warheads, and will there be a nuclear terrorist event?
Here, of course, it would be very difficult to agree on a definition of what nuclear terrorism is and who is a nuclear terrorist or not. That's the first thing that I would propose to you. But secondly, here I think we do have you have the interaction in the at least in the examples you gave of two things. One is the NPT, clearly, and the CSA agreement that Russia, in this case, would have in terms of sharing nuclear weapon technology or materials with another country, let alone a non-state actor like Hezbollah or Hamas or whomever, all right? So that would constitute a direct violation of Articles 1 and 2 of the NPT. And then you have to see that in conjunction with United Nations Security Council Resolution 1540, which is practically of course, inability of the international community for practical reasons to come to a macro convention on non-state actors and access to weapons of mass destruction related technologies and materials. It was the way in which, in a rare moment of international consensus, which was very important, I believe, Resolution 1540 established a number of norms and very specific criteria and the institutions that would be dealing with that, namely the IAEA for nuclear, the OPCW for chemical, and so on. So I believe that the problem in itself is a very serious problem, but there is no absence or gap in terms of international norm or practice about this, how to deal with that. When it comes to nuclear, for example, you asked me, well, how you know they are not doing this or that? Well, we are checking, we are inspecting countries. We know the kind of capacities and material that countries have, including the beneficiaries or recipients of this material. And it is this capacity to check on that would allow us to do that. On the rest, on the non-state actors, then of course you have to rely on national means of determining the existence of these things, and there could be perhaps a specific mandate for a concrete case if that was the situation.
Time here, and then you have your flags with 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Mark Klamberg. I'm normally at Stockholm University, but now a fellow here in Washington at Washington College of Law.
Yes.
I want to commend you and your organization's work for the very important work you do. Now, my question relates to the Zaporizhzhia power plant, and I followed it via news, and we've heard you and your colleague expressing concern about the situation. And one question that myself and I imagine others have asked is the question about attribution. Who is causing the danger to this power plant? And my question to you is, to what extent have you encountered obstacles to report and inform the rest of the world about who is responsible for this? Could you please comment on that? Thank you.
Yes, of course. This is, of course, something that many people ask. There are certain objective limitations that I would like to mention. In particular, on the fact that in most cases, and especially since the establishment of the 5 concrete principles, which is already, in my opinion, a metric of their efficiency, most of the things that we have seen relate to drone attacks. Since we established the principles, we haven't seen direct shelling. Why? Because direct shelling would allow us to, by analysis of what we see, the traces left behind, etc., the diameter of impact would allow us to determine caliber, and with that, the probable origin of that. There was some of that before our arrival to the plant, but ever since, there has been only drone activity. When it comes to drone activity, as you know, the determination of the origin point of a drone is more complicated because of the trajectory, because of the erratic trajectory, and also because we are in occupied territory where we have forces of both belligerents acting. So even if you were able, and there are some technologies, as I assume you are aware, that will allow you to have some indication with a range up to 5 or 10 kilometers, not much more than that, where approximately the origin of, depending also on the sophistication of the drone and the communication equipment that the drone would have. Even in that circumstance, you could have drones launched from zone A, where country A is in command, that could be arguably could be attributed to that same country, or the opposite. So as I always say, we as an inspectorate, we cannot speculate. So if we have, and this is what I said and I stand by it, if I am in the possession of and indisputable evidence, I will not hide it. I will say it. But it has to be indisputable. On something as serious as this, we cannot say, well, with a high degree of probability, this has this color or that color, because the consequences could be very grave. On that, I should also tell you that I have very, very, very clear conversations with both presidents on occasion.
Thank you so much, Director General Grossi. Michaela Dodge with the National Institute for Public Policy. In many ways, your remarks show that the IAEA is facing unprecedented situation. Mm-hmm. In your ideal world, what tools would you have to make the IAEA better equipped to address those challenges? And then among those tools, which ones do you think are politically feasible?
Well, you know, it would be nice to imagine, like, well, I think the colleague left, but one of your colleagues said in terms of having a reform or having, you know, superpowers to go inspect, attribute, and this and that. I'm not enamored with this kind of approach. I think I have to do what I have to do with the means I have. I have a solid statute. I have an inspection regime which is very strong. I have incredible inspectors who are incredibly committed to do what they want. And I have the power of the pen. And I have the power to tell the world what is happening. So, you know, yes, you can say, you know, a report would send the country directly to the Security Council or impose penalization, et cetera, et cetera. Well, frankly, I'm not so convinced. So what I want to say is that when you really want to do something with an international organization, and when you really play the music sheet with vigor, there's a lot you can do. And saying that perhaps if only we had something that would be, you know, we have what we have. I ran to this position knowing what I had, and I'm happy with the tools I have. Of course, it doesn't mean that things are good, but when you come with a strong case, when you can explain what you want to do, as you can see, people must listen to us. People must, and people do listen to us. If people expect the IAEA to be, you know, singing on one side of the choir, or this is not what we are supposed to be doing. So what perhaps in a very, you know, dramatistic way, I would say we need to be funded. It's the only thing we need. We need countries to support us. We are, I think, the best deal that the international community could ever have for what we give in terms of non-proliferation assurances, in terms of, and now even with all this nuclear that is happening, I really hope it will happen, because I think it's a great opportunity for all. But we need to have the means to do our job. So I hope that this commitment to help us will always be there. So that would be what I would request, is that countries stand behind the IAEA.
Your keynote was masterful, but if possible, the dialogue was even more masterful. It is.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.